Let me tell you about the worst Tuesday of my career. Well, technically it was a galactic standard Wednesday, but when you're stuck on a luxury cruise ship fixing toilets that refuse to flush in zero gravity, every day feels like a Tuesday. My name's Jake Murphy, and I'm what passes for a maintenance engineer aboard the Cosmic Serenity. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the guy who gets called when someone's sonic shower won't stop playing elevator music, or when the food replicators start producing what can only be described as edible regret. The Cosmic Serenity is one of those ultra-luxury starliners that caters to rich aliens who want to gawk at supernovas while sipping drinks that cost more than my yearly salary. Think Titanic, but in space, and with more tentacles in first class. Captain Blixie runs this floating palace of pretension. She's a Zephyrian, which means she's got 6 arms, purple skin, and the kind of relentless optimism that makes you want to check her coffee for stimulants. Every morning at 0700 ship time, she broadcasts her cheery status report about our wonderful journey through the cosmos. I usually spend that time wondering if there's a way to accidentally eject myself from an airlock without triggering the safety protocols. Then there's Grond, our chief of security. Picture a walking paranoid delusion with 8 eyes and an exoskeleton that looks like it was designed by someone who really hates hugs. Grond sees threats everywhere. The ice machine? Potential infiltration point. That friendly maintenance droid? Probably a spy. Me walking down a corridor with a toolbox? Obviously planning some kind of elaborate heist. Murphy, he'd growl at me every morning, all 8 eyes tracking my movement like I was carrying a bomb instead of a plunger. What suspicious activities are you planning today? Oh, I'd reply, thought I'd overthrow the government, maybe fix the replicator in Suite 12 that keeps producing haggis instead of chocolate cake. He never appreciated my humor. The passengers were even worse. Take Lady Vexandra, a Plutonian socialite whose idea of roughing it was staying in a suite with only 2 private decks. She had this habit of calling maintenance every time her diamond-encrusted oxygen mask fogged up slightly. Emergency, she'd trill in that voice that sounded like a piccolo being murdered. I can barely breathe through this substandard equipment. The equipment was fine. The problem was that Plutonians exhale methane, and her mask's filters weren't designed for someone who treated respiratory functions like a chemical warfare experiment. But the real joke was the ship's security system. State-of-the-art, according to the brochures. Quantum encrypted, neural linked, impossible to hack. The sales pitch made it sound like Fort Knox had a baby with a computer genius and then sent that baby to Map E. In reality, I'd accidentally triggered 12 security alerts just that morning while trying to fix a sticky door in the port corridor. The system was so sensitive it once classified a passenger's pet Rigelian hamster as a potential boarding threat. For 3 hours we were on high alert because a furry creature the size of a tennis ball had been detected moving through the ventilation system. I'd tried explaining to Grond that maybe, just maybe, a security system that couldn't tell the difference between a hamster and a commando team might have some flaws. But apparently questioning the ship's defenses was exactly what a saboteur would do, so that conversation went nowhere fast. That morning started like any other. My work order list had 17 items, ranging from mysterious humming sound in Cargo Bay 3 to Lady Vexandra's bidet is playing polka music. Just another day in paradise, fixing problems that shouldn't exist on a ship that cost more than most planetary defense budgets. If I'd known what was coming, I might have called in sick. But then again, where's the fun in that? I was elbowed deep in the guts of a malfunctioning protein synthesizer when the ship's peaceful ambience got rudely interrupted by the sound of our hull being breached. Not the gentle whoosh of a scheduled docking, mind you, but the violent grinding of metal on metal that screams someone's crashing this party and they weren't invited. The emergency klaxon started wailing, which was Captain Blixie's cue to get on the intercom with her trademark optimism. Attention passengers and crew. Her voice chirped through the speakers. We're experiencing a minor technical difficulty. Please remain calm and proceed to your nearest designated safe area for a brief safety demonstration. A safety demonstration. Right. Because when pirates are cutting through your hull with plasma torches, the appropriate response is obviously an educational seminar. I could hear the panic starting already. Screaming in 17 different alien languages, The thunderous sound of 200 passengers trying to fit through corridors designed for orderly evacuation, and somewhere in the distance, Lady Vexandra demanding to know why her emergency suite wasn't being prioritized. The pirates made their entrance like they'd rehearsed it. Probably because they had. This wasn't their first rodeo, and it showed. They came through the breach points with military precision, if military precision included a lot more tentacles and energy weapons that glowed ominously. Their leader was exactly what you'd expect from Central Casting's generic space pirate catalog. Captain Skarr stood about 7 feet tall, had 4 arms and enough scars to suggest he'd used his face to break up several bar fights. He wore the kind of elaborate coat that screamed, "I'm compensating for something." And when he spoke, his voice had that gravelly quality that comes from breathing too much recycled air and not enough dental hygiene. Attention, flesh bags and assorted breathing creatures. He announced over the ship's intercom system, because apparently pirates have tech support too. This vessel is now under the temporary management of Captain Skarr and his associates. Please remain calm, cooperate fully, and remember that customer satisfaction is our top priority. I had to admire the professionalism, even if the service was a bit invasive. The crew's response was about as effective as you'd expect. Rond, for all his paranoid preparation, managed to get himself stunned in the first 30 seconds. Apparently 8 eyes don't help when you're looking in 7 wrong directions. Captain Blixey tried negotiating, which is exactly as useful as it sounds when the other party has already made it clear they're taking your stuff whether you like it or not. The pirates had this down to a science. Round up the passengers, disable the security systems, locate the valuables, and get out before anyone could mount an effective response. They moved through the ship like they'd done this 1,000 times before, which they probably had. And me? I was completely invisible to them. Just another maintenance worker in grimy coveralls, holding a wrench and looking appropriately confused by the sudden change in management. Pirates, it turns out, have the same blindness to service workers as everyone else in the universe. I might as well have been part of the furniture. Skarr's second-in-command was a Nexari called Nexus, which showed about as much creativity in naming as you'd expect. Nexus was their tech specialist, judging by the collection of electronic devices grafted to his skull and the way he interfaced directly with the ship's systems. He moved through the corridors like he owned the place, probably because in his mind he already did. Security systems neutralized, he reported to Skarr in that synthetic voice that comes from having your vocal cords replaced with a computer. Standard civilian vessel protocols. No military-grade defenses detected. Of course not. The Cosmic Serenity's idea of military-grade defense was asking nicely for potential threats to please go away. Within 20 minutes, they had the entire passenger manifest and crew roster rounded up in the main dining hall. Well, almost entire. Somehow they'd missed one maintenance engineer who was supposed to be fixing a protein synthesizer but was instead crouched in a supply closet, listening to their operational briefing through the ventilation system. Standard extraction protocol, Skarr was explaining to his crew. Valuables, personal effects, anything worth selling. Leave the passengers alive but comfortable. Reputation is everything in this business. How thoughtful of them. Pirates with customer service standards and a 5-star rating system. The thing about being invisible is that people tend to forget you have ears, hands and eyes, and access to every system on the ship they just decided to rob. This was going to be interesting. 20 minutes into their temporary management transition, the pirates had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They'd cataloged the passengers, secured the crew, and started the systematic looting that pays for their retirement plans. Everything was going according to their well-rehearsed plan, which is probably why nobody noticed when I wandered out of my hiding spot and started doing what I do best, looking like I belonged there. The beauty of maintenance work is that nobody questions a guy with a toolbox. I could walk up to their equipment, start poking around, and as long as I looked appropriately confused and occasionally muttered things like "that's weird" or "this wasn't in the manual," I was practically invisible. It was Nexus who finally noticed me fiddling with one of their scanner arrays. "You," he said, his mechanical voice making the words sound like a computer error message. "Identify yourself." I looked up with my best deer in headlights expression. Jake Murphy, maintenance. Someone said there was a problem with the power coupling on this unit? Nexus stared at me for a long moment, which gave me plenty of time to appreciate just how many cybernetic implants one person could have without technically becoming a robot. His head looked like someone had decided to upgrade a perfectly functional skull with spare parts from a computer store. "You are not on the crew manifest," he said, scanning me with one of those handheld devices that pirates apparently use instead of proper introductions. "Yeah, I get that a lot. I'm contracted maintenance, not regular crew. Jake Murphy, Murphy's repairs and general mechanical problem solving. I fix things." I held up my wrench like it was a business card. "You guys need anything fixed while you're here? The protein synthesizer in Section C has been making this weird humming sound." Captain Skarr appeared over Nexus's shoulder, which was impressive considering Skarr was about twice the size of any normal person and moved like he was carrying his own personal gravity field. "What species is this?" Skarr asked, studying me like I was a particularly interesting bug. Nexus ran another scan, frowning at the results. "Unknown. Database indicates possible classification as human, but that cannot be correct. Humans are not spacefaring in this sector." "Actually," I said helpfully, "we're pretty new to the whole space thing. Still figuring out which end of the rocket goes where, you know. But we're enthusiastic learners." Skarr looked at his scanner readings and started laughing. It was the kind of laugh that suggested either great amusement or a serious mental health crisis. Average physical capabilities, no natural weapons, no apparent combat training. "What are you doing on a luxury starship, little human?" "Fixing toilets, mostly. You'd be surprised how often the zero-G plumbing backs up when people don't follow the posted instructions. Last week I had to unclog a drain that had somehow formed its own ecosystem." This seemed to amuse Skarr even more. "A janitor. They have a janitor aboard this flying palace." He turned to his crew. "Leave this one alone. It poses no threat, and someone needs to maintain the facilities while we work." And just like that, I went from potential hostage to acceptable collateral damage. It's amazing how quickly you can become invisible when people decide you're not worth their attention. The pirates went back to their systematic looting, and I went back to being the maintenance guy who happened to be wandering around their operation. They were thorough, professional, and completely focused on their job, which meant they weren't paying attention to me learning everything about their equipment, their procedures, and their complete reliance on technology they didn't actually understand. See, the thing about being a maintenance engineer is that you develop a certain relationship with the systems you work on. You learn their quirks, their weaknesses, and exactly how to make them do things they weren't designed to do. The Cosmic Serenity wasn't just my workplace. It was my domain. Every pipe, every wire, every access panel and emergency override was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. And these pirates? They were guests in my house. Uninvited, heavily armed, professionally courteous guests, but guests nonetheless. I spent the next hour wandering around, ostensibly checking various systems for routine maintenance issues, while actually mapping out every piece of equipment the pirates had brought aboard. Their sensors, their communications gear, their weapons charging stations, their portable shield generators. Everything they needed to maintain control of the ship. Everything that could mysteriously malfunction if someone who knew what he was doing decided to have a really bad day. "Is there a problem with the environmental controls?" I asked Nexus at one point, standing next to a wall panel that definitely hadn't been humming like that when the pirates arrived. He glanced over, ran a quick scan, and shrugged, all systems showing normal parameters. Weird. Well, if you guys need anything, just give me a shout. I'll be around." Oh, I'd be around, all right. The question was whether they'd notice until it was way too late. You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, pirates apparently missed that particular piece of literature, because their plan had one tiny flaw, but it assumed the ship they'd just taken over didn't have someone who knew every system intimately, and had developed a personal grudge against uninvited guests. I started small. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger alarms or draw attention. Just tiny. Annoying malfunctions that could be easily explained as normal wear and tear on a ship this size. The first casualty was their communications array. A simple matter of crossing a few wires in the junction box behind their temporary command post. Suddenly, their encrypted communications started picking up local traffic, including what sounded like a very dramatic Rigelian soap opera and someone's grocery list being dictated in 17 languages. Technical difficulties, I heard Nexus explaining to Skarr. Old ship. Outdated systems. We'll have it resolved shortly. The second casualty was their sensor network. A tiny adjustment to the power coupling, and their scanners started registering false positives everywhere. Apparently, the ship was now crawling with armed resistance fighters who were somehow hiding in the walls, the ceiling, and inside the coffee machines. Sensor ghosts, Nexus muttered, running diagnostics that would tell him exactly nothing useful. Interference from the ship's systems. By the time I got to their third piece of equipment, a pattern was emerging. Or rather, it wasn't emerging, which was the whole point. Each malfunction looked like random system failure, the kind of thing that happens when you park your high-tech equipment next to a ship full of jury-rigged alien technology. The beautiful thing about pirates is that they're used to working with unreliable equipment. They expect things to break down, especially when they're operating in hostile environments. So when their gear started developing mysterious problems, they treated it as an occupational hazard rather than enemy action. I was having the time of my life. The environmental controls were particularly fun to play with. Nothing dangerous, you understand. I'm not a psychopath. But a 5-degree temperature drop in the corridor where their weapons were stored? Perfectly reasonable given the power fluctuations they were experiencing. The fact that it made their energy cells less efficient was just an unfortunate coincidence. The lighting in Section B started flickering randomly, which wasn't dangerous but was definitely annoying. The gravity generator developed a slight wobble that made walking in certain areas feel like you were on a boat in rough seas. The air recycling system started producing a faint humming sound that wasn't quite loud enough to be alarming but was definitely loud enough to be irritating. Death by 1,000 minor inconveniences. The pirates started getting frustrated around the 2-hour mark, which was when I decided to escalate things slightly. A few of their number had been posted as guards in various parts of the ship, which meant they were isolated and vulnerable to someone who knew exactly where every maintenance hatch and service tunnel led. The first guard I dealt with was stationed near the cargo bay. Poor guy never saw it coming. One moment he was standing there looking bored and professional. The next moment the artificial gravity in his section had mysteriously reversed itself. He spent 15 very confused minutes stuck to the ceiling, trying to figure out how to call for help while hanging upside down. By the time his backup arrived, I'd already restored normal gravity and disappeared into the maintenance tunnels. The official explanation became localized gravity malfunction. Cause unknown, recommend avoiding Section C7 until repairs can be completed. The second guard got the environmental controls treatment. Nothing harmful. Minute go. Just a sudden drop in air pressure that triggered all his suit's emergency protocols and left him stumbling around in what was essentially a personal panic attack. His backup found him hyperventilating into his oxygen mask, swearing that the ship's atmosphere was trying to kill him. The third guard just disappeared entirely. 1 minute he was there. The next minute he was locked in a supply closet with no idea how he'd gotten there and no way to contact his team because his communications equipment had mysteriously stopped working. It was around this time that Skarr started to suspect they might have a problem. Nexus, I heard him say over their increasingly unreliable communication system. How many crew members did we miss in the initial sweep? Impossible to determine, Captain. The ship's manifest appears to be corrupted, and our sensors are still experiencing technical difficulties. Then find them. Someone is playing games with us, and I don't appreciate the humor. Oh, but I was just getting started. See, the thing about being a maintenance engineer is that you learn to think in systems. Everything on a ship is connected to everything else, and if you know the connections, you can make those systems do very interesting things. Time to show these professionals what a really bad day looked like. By hour 3 of their routine extraction operation, Captain Skarr was starting to look like a man who was rethinking his career choices. Half his guards had been mysteriously incapacitated by equipment malfunctions. Their communications were playing what sounded like alien elevator music, and their sensors kept insisting the ship was simultaneously empty and crawling with invisible enemies. That's when I decided it was time for the main event. I found Skarr in the main dining hall, pacing back and forth while Nexus tried to explain why their foolproof plan was falling apart in ways that defied both logic and probability. "Captain," I called out, stepping into the room with my toolbox in one hand and my best customer service smile. "I heard you folks were having some technical difficulties. Thought I might be able to help." Skarr spun around, all four arms reaching for weapons, which seemed like an overreaction to an offer of technical support. "You," he growled, "what are you?" "Jake Murphy, maintenance engineer. We covered this earlier." I set down my toolbox and pulled out a diagnostic scanner that looked impressive but was actually just a fancy multimeter. "Done tracking the problems you're having with your equipment. Want to know what I found?" "Enlighten me," Skarr said, though his tone suggested enlightenment wasn't really what he was hoping for. "Well, the thing is, your gear isn't actually malfunctioning. It's working exactly as designed. The problem is that someone's been systematically sabotaging your operation from the inside. Using nothing but routine maintenance access and a thorough understanding of how Starship systems actually work." Nexus made a sound like a computer having an existential crisis. "Impossible. We monitored all crew movements. No one had access to our equipment." "You monitored all crew movements," I agreed, "but you didn't monitor the maintenance guy." "Because why would you? I'm just some harmless human with a toolbox, right? Average physical capabilities, no combat training, obviously not a threat to a professional operation like yours." I could see the moment when it clicked for Skarr. The realization that they'd been played, not by some elite military unit or sophisticated resistance network, but by one annoyed janitor with access to the ship's systems. "The funny thing about humans," I continued, pulling out my maintenance tablet and calling up the ship's environmental controls, "is that we're really good at holding grudges. And when someone comes into our workspace and starts breaking things, we take it personally." I tapped a few commands into the tablet. Throughout the ship, every door that wasn't currently occupied by passengers or crew members slammed shut and locked. Emergency bulkheads activated. The pirates who were still mobile suddenly found themselves trapped in whatever section they'd been standing in when I decided to redecorate the ship's layout. See, the thing about a starship is that it's basically a giant life support system with engines attached. And if you know how that life support system works, you can make it do very interesting things. For instance, Bori. I tapped another command. The gravity in the dining hall shifted, making everyone except me feel like they were standing on a steep incline. Pirates started sliding toward the far wall, trying to maintain their footing on a floor that was suddenly tilted at a 30-degree angle. Localized gravity control. Very useful for maintenance work, less fun when someone uses it to turn your world sideways. Skarr was trying to aim a weapon at me while sliding down what used to be a level floor. "Nexus. Override the ship's systems." "I'm trying, Captain. The human has administrative access to everything." "Of course I do," I said, adjusting the gravity field so that Skarr's weapon was now too heavy for him to lift. "I'm the maintenance engineer. I need access to fix things when they break. Speaking of which, I activated the fire suppression system in the sections where the remaining pirates were trapped. Nothing dangerous, just enough foam to make them very uncomfortable and unable to see much of anything. The thing about pirates," I explained to Skarr, who was now lying on the floor because standing had become geometrically impossible, "is that you're used to dealing with civilian ships that follow normal operational procedures. You expect resistance to come from security forces, military escorts, or armed passengers. You don't expect it to come from the guy who knows exactly where every pipe, wire, and control system on the ship goes." I walked over to where Nexus was trapped under his own equipment, which had become significantly heavier when I'd adjusted the local gravity field. "And you?" "Oh," I said, kneeling down to get a good look at all his fancy cybernetic implants. "You made the classic mistake of assuming that fancy technology is always better than practical knowledge. Your implants are impressive, but they're designed to interface with standard ship systems. And this ship hasn't been standard since I started working on it 3 years ago. I pulled a small device from my toolbox and attached it to one of his data ports. Emergency maintenance override. Gives me direct access to any system connected to the ship's network, including apparently your head. Nexus's eyes went wide as his own implants started working against him, feeding him false data and making his cybernetic enhancements about as useful as a calculator that only knows how to spell error. "Now then," I said, standing up and addressing the room full of incapacitated pirates, "let's talk about the new management structure aboard this vessel. I'm thinking something a bit more democratic than your previous approach. The waste management system that I'd mentioned using for my ultimate trap? Well, let's just say that Cargo Bay 2 was about to become very, very unpleasant for anyone locked inside it. And since that's where I'd herded most of the remaining pirates using a combination of environmental controls and creative interpretation of the ship's safety protocols. Sometimes being the maintenance guy has its advantages. 6 hours after the pirates had announced their temporary management transition, I was standing in Cargo Bay 2 watching Captain Skarr try to maintain some dignity while covered head to toe in what the ship's waste management system politely classified as organic recycling matter. "This is highly unprofessional," he protested, which seemed like an odd complaint coming from someone whose job involved armed robbery. "Yeah, well, so is boarding someone's ship without an invitation," I replied, checking my tablet to make sure the containment fields were holding properly. Think of this as a learning experience about the importance of proper workplace etiquette. The remaining pirates were secured in various uncomfortable but non-lethal ways throughout the cargo bay. Some were stuck to the walls courtesy of industrial adhesive from the maintenance supplies. Others were wrapped in cargo netting that had mysteriously tangled itself around them while they were trying to escape through the ventilation system. A few were simply sitting in corners too dizzy from the rotating gravity fields to attempt anything more ambitious than basic breathing. Nexus had been the easiest to contain. His cybernetic implants, designed to interface seamlessly with starship systems, that had become his own personal prison when I'd fed them a maintenance virus that convinced them they were experiencing a massive system failure. He was currently curled up in a ball, muttering binary code and occasionally asking if someone could please reboot his consciousness. The passengers and crew had been released once I'd confirmed all the pirates were secured. Captain Blixey had immediately launched into a speech about teamwork and positive thinking that made me seriously consider locking her in the cargo bay with Skarr. Grond was skulking around looking embarrassed, all 8 eyes studying the security footage of his 30-second defeat and muttering about equipment upgrades. Lady Vexandra had demanded to know why her rescue hadn't been prioritized, then immediately filed a complaint about the temporary interruption to her manicure appointment. "Jake," Captain Blixey said, appearing at my shoulder with her trademark enthusiasm, "the passengers are calling you a hero. They want to throw you a party." "That's nice, Captain, but I've got a protein synthesizer in Section C that's still making weird noises, and Lady Vexandra's bidet has apparently started playing polka music again." "Surely those can wait? You've just saved the entire ship." I looked around the cargo bay at the collection of very uncomfortable pirates who had, 6 hours ago, been confident professionals executing a routine heist. "I fixed a problem, Captain. Same thing I do every day. The fact that this problem happened to involve uninvited guests doesn't make it special." That was mostly true. The pirates had been just another malfunction in the ship's normal operation, something that needed to be identified, isolated, and corrected. The methods were a bit different from my usual repairs, but the basic principle was the same: figure out what's broken and fix it. "But how did you know what to do?" Grond asked, his paranoid curiosity finally overcoming his embarrassment. "You're just a maintenance worker." "Just a maintenance worker," I repeated. "Right. The guy who knows every system on this ship, has access to every control panel, every emergency override, every manual shutdown and startup procedure. The guy who spent 3 years learning exactly how every piece of technology on this vessel actually works, not just how it's supposed to work." I gestured at the pirates. "These folks are professionals, but they're used to dealing with standard civilian ships run by people who follow the manual. They expected normal security responses, normal crew reactions, Normal system behaviors. They didn't expect someone who's been jury-rigging, and creatively interpreting manufacturer specifications for years. Skarr managed to wipe enough of the waste management system's output off his face to speak clearly. This cannot be the first time pirates have targeted this vessel. Oh, it's not, I said casually, checking the cargo bay's environmental systems to make sure my prisoners weren't going to suffocate. Third time this year, actually. You guys were better organized than the Crimson Fleet bunch, but not as creative as those Void runners who tried to disguise themselves as health inspectors. The silence that followed was the kind of silence you get when you've just revealed information that recontextualizes everything everyone thought they knew about a situation. Third time? Captain Blixey asked faintly. Yeah, but don't worry about it. I've got the routine down pretty well by now. Contain the problem. Minimize disruption to normal operations. File the appropriate paperwork with station security when we make port. Speaking of which, Captain Skarr, I'm going to need your crew manifest for the incident report. Skarr stared at me like I'd just asked him to explain quantum mechanics using interpretive dance. You want me to help you with paperwork? Well, yeah, I've got to document the whole thing properly. Maintenance logs, security reports, damage assessments. It's all got to be filed in triplicate. And I'm not writing up 47 individual incident reports because you didn't bring proper identification for your people. I pulled out a data pad and started walking through the cargo bay, taking inventory of my prisoners. Let's see, Captain Skarr, species Korthak, approximately 7 feet tall. Distinguishing features include ritual scarring and what appears to be a significant dental hygiene problem. Nexus species Nexari, heavily modified with cybernetic implants, currently experiencing technical difficulties. This is surreal, one of the other pirates muttered. Tell me about it, I replied. You guys interrupted me in the middle of fixing a replicator that kept producing Haggis instead of chocolate cake. Do you know how complicated it is to recalibrate a molecular assembly matrix when the base pattern recognition system has been contaminated by someone's nostalgic programming? By the time station security arrived to collect my prisoners, I'd completed all the paperwork, filed my maintenance reports, and gotten started on the protein synthesizer in Section C. The weird humming sound had turned out to be a loose coupling in the secondary power feed, which took about 10 minutes to fix once I could focus on it without interruption. Lady Vex Andra's bidet was next on the list. The polka music problem was actually more interesting than the pirate situation had been. Someone had apparently crossed the audio feed with the ship's entertainment system, which meant I got to spend the rest of my shift figuring out why bathroom fixtures were networked to the recreational database in the first place. Just another Tuesday in paradise. Or Wednesday. Whatever. When you're fixing toilets in space, every day feels pretty much the same anyway. At least until the next batch of pirates shows up. But hey, that's what keeps the job interesting.